Good morning, afternoon, and evening to all of you who have joined us. My name is Johnson Kang with Cloudian, and I'll be your host for the webinar today. So I see a few folks who are still logging into the audio, so let's give them a few more seconds. Well, thank you to all who have joined us as we have an exciting program in the next 30 to 45 minutes. I want to welcome all of you to our webinar today on Welcome to the Future of Your Digital Archive. Joining us today are Brian Campanotti, CEO at CloudFirst.io, and former CTO at Front Porch Digital. We also have Steve Powers, Global Account Manager at the Ergonomic Group, and David Phillips, M&E Solutions Architect at Cloudian and former architect at NBC. For today's webinar, feel free to ask questions at any time in the chat window, and we'll make sure our presenters will have a chance to answer them near the end of the session during Q&A. And with that, let's get started. All right, Steve.
Thanks, Johnson. My name is Steve Powers. I'm with the sales team at the Ergonomic Group. We're a technology solutions provider specializing in providing time-tested, proven solutions and industry expertise to clients in the M&E industry. We've been in business for over 30 years with headquarters in Westbury, New York, and we support our clients on both a national and global basis. We employ over 200 people and provide infrastructure and workflow solutions for our clients, including both pre-sale architectural design and post-sales installation and professional services. For today's webinar, we have partnered with industry leaders Cloudian and CloudFirst to offer next-generation digital archive solutions. Active archives are an increasingly critical part of the media workflow today, and the need for highly scalable and quickly accessible archives is greater than ever as higher resolution media demands, more capacity, and media reuse requirements multiply in multi-format, time-sensitive workflows. Today you will hear about the joint solution of CloudFirst Rapid Migrate and Cloudian HyperStore technologies, which enable easy migration from a legacy archive platform to a modern object storage platform with the benefits of scalable and searchable archives which can be monetized. I would like to now introduce you to Brian Campanotti, CEO from CloudFirst, who will take you through their solution offering. Brian?
Great, thanks, Steve. Appreciate the introduction. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you a little bit of background on CloudFirst, talk about some of the problems as we see it in the industry right now, specifically around, as Steve described, these active archives in the media and entertainment and ancillary space. And then sort of lead into David's presentation where we sort of tie everything together with some of the Cloudian advanced solutions. So just a little bit of background here. Whoops. A little bit of a lag here. So CloudFirst was actually founded January of last year. And effectively, we're innovators in the area of digital transformation, archive, and preservation. Myself, Brian Campanotti, I'm the founder of CloudFirst. Prior to this, I was CTO at Front Porch Digital for 13 years. We were acquired by Oracle back in 2014, and I was inside of Oracle for 3 years before leaving to move on to founding CloudFirst. Prior to Front Porch Digital, I was the founder, CEO, and CTO of Mastech, who is also an archive software provider, active archive software provider. So just in that experience, I have pretty close to 2 decades of time now working specifically on storage abstraction, storage orchestration, predominantly targeted towards media and entertainment organizations. But in terms of CloudFirst, we are a consultancy, professional services, and archive software and solutions provider as well. And one of our largest value proposition is we've worked with hundreds of the largest global media brands around the globe, and we're able to bring and leverage that experience into your organizations with our experienced team to be able to sort of leverage the knowledge and of the masses to benefit your organizations. So if we looked at what CloudFirst does, really when I started the company, it was really a consultancy based around panicked people wondering what to do with, the apparent, downturn or well, anyways, with my departure from the Oracle Front Porch Digital team. And really what that initial engagements tended to be was really, talking people down from the ledge. Diva is still some of the best software out there today. But, with some uncertainty in terms of its future, some changes that have gone on in the organization over the past couple of years, we were really telling the client to take a step back and trying to work with them to develop a 12 to 24-month vision and strategy. So, assessing what their objectives were strategically within the organizations. Were they looking on-prem? Were they looking at, object data tape? Were they looking to move to the cloud? And helping to build this strategy. But, the key message here is, it's not a decision that you can make quickly just because of the volume of the data, the impact on the workflows. So we were leveraging our experience to be able to help, sort of shape and, define what that path might be. The next phase of this was really gathering, deep insights into these environments. So, by doing analysis of utilization trends and, storage growth over, years and looking at duty cycles and ingress and egress, we established quite a significant business around doing data modeling and data analytics, effectively allowing or empowering the clients to now make data-driven decisions based on their real-world utilization. And I think, what we found a lot of times was this expose of data was really enlightening to these clients because, most of them don't really have a good grasp of how they're using their data. They might know a total capacity. They might, know how many data tapes they buy per year to expand the system. But with our ability to get into these systems and really do a deep analysis, it turns out a lot of valuable information. And then the next step of the business was really taking that information and helping to build TCO models. So for organizations that hadn't specifically decided what to do and where to do it, we were getting down almost to the, segmentation of their content to understand how much data they're using on a regular basis, how much data can go into, colder, deeper type archives, and looking at, either an on-premise model, a public cloud model with various providers, looking at the different storage tiers, or proposing a hybrid type solution as well. And then the next step of this, long and complex path was really about helping with the heavy lift. So when we had defined a path, we developed a product called Rapid Migrate, which I'll delve into here a little bit as well. And effectively, this is software that enables the lift and shift from the legacy archive platform into the next generation archive solution. And then the final step of this is, sort of getting back to this idea of having storage orchestration or storage abstraction that we define as the software-defined archive, and really being able to use cognitive characteristics to be able to shape where and when and how your content is stored across these very complex ecosystems. Okay, so getting into what we do with Rapid Migrate. So effectively, Rapid Migrate is a legacy archive migration tool. So, we have compatibility with basically every major legacy archive provider. I mean, some of the names that you might recognize, Quantum and Diva and Mastech and SGL and, several others as well. So really, it doesn't matter what the platform is. We're just, sort of experts in the idea of facilitating these legacy archive migrations into your next generation platforms. One of the keys to Rapid Migrate is obviously we can't interrupt your existing production workflows and lifecycle. So what we do is essentially we ebb and flow with the production demands of your day-to-day operations. And we're trying to maximize the number and amount of resources we're using for this migration, but without impacting your existing operations. So, at some points in the day, we might be using no resources, and at some points in the day, we might be using, every resource that you have in your system to try to get that heavy lift done as quickly as possible. And just to give you a little bit of context, we have clients that have archives that are 10 or 20 petabytes, and depending on the utilization, the resources, the generation of, tape technology that they're using, some of these migrations could take well over a year as well. So, this is why we encourage clients to start thinking and planning today, because, you don't want to wait until you're faced with a pressure decision of whether to, stay on your existing platform or to, maybe move off to object storage. we want to take it at a point where we have a plan. And part of the analysis that we do, we can actually do a detailed timeline assessment as well to give you an idea of how long your migration would actually take. So as we're pumping the data out using Rapid Migrate, effectively we're writing to any local or remote targets. We have a good assortment of interfaces. The most often used ones are, S3, CIFS, FTP, NFS. So depending on what the target is, we could support that direct push into, your target platform. And, obviously, as you'll hear from David next, they support natively an S3 protocol as well on the local object storage. We allow the users to define the batch job, the order of migrations, et cetera, et cetera. And, sometimes there's more complex workflows at play. So there might be a media orchestration level, a media supply chain, there might be a MAM system. So we can trigger off post-migration scripts and actions as well, make web services calls to kick off different features, or, maybe we're calling some cloud functions to be able to process the data. But one of the important things to consider here is we're not just moving the data itself, we're also preserving all the legacy archive metadata as well. So we're sort of, and I think you'll hear that sort of resonant through the presentation today, is it's very important that we're giving you and maintaining the information about your data, not just the data itself. And then what we do with that metadata is we can either directly write it into your key value pair tags if you're writing to a Cloudian or to an AWS or Google store, where we're tagging the objects there directly. But for MAN compatibility and media supply chain compatibility, we're also generating a JSON sidecar metadata file that comes along that basically has a full manifest for the object. It has all the things like, checksums and hashes and provenance information, inclusive of all the legacy archive metadata. And that could be consumed by your downstream platforms, whether that's, consuming it in a Lambda function in AWS or by your MAM system. So it becomes a real full end-to-end authenticated path for your content. And of course, we do validate checksums along the way as well. So by the time the content lands in your target destination, you're guaranteed that it's exactly what came out of your legacy archive. And sometimes we're doing those migrations natively, but we've also have some plugins as well that get automatically deployed in this life cycle of this asset, where we can do things like WAN encryption and acceleration. So you don't have to bring your own licenses to the table. It's part of the package. And we also can do asset rewrapping and asset transcoding as well. And that could be, high resolution transcoding if you wanted to have a federated format before you moved into your next generation platform. Or we can be doing things like generating proxies and throwing those up into, an AWS bucket for machine learning and AI if you wanted to, disconnected from your high resolution asset, where we could be putting high resolution assets into your Cloudian, for example. And the key behind this is effectively we want to remove all the barriers to entry. And we know this is just a transactional application. So it's offered as a SaaS model. Effectively, it's priced per gigabyte egress from your legacy archive system. And when you're done your migration, you simply turn the software off and you stop paying. So pictorially, if we look at this, effectively we have the legacy archive platform, obviously sustaining your production workflows today. Rapid Migrate gets installed inside your facility on a commodity server. Again, we can run in a VM environment. It could be on a bare metal chassis. We have some clients that don't have a lot of processing requirements, so we're running it on a Raspberry Pi. It's all run in Docker containers. And the idea here is you can import, batch jobs into the system. So you can basically define the migration order, or you can let our algorithms decide the best order for migration based on age and utilization patterns. There's a nice dashboard where you can sort of track, how many tapes are remaining to migrate, how much data has been moved. We show, data transfer trends and things like that. Rapid Migrate itself is stateful, so if you did interrupt your migration process, you could just, resume it and it'll pick up where it left off. And effectively, we're egressing the data as efficiently as possible from the legacy archive system. It lands, if it needs to be processed and we can't do a direct push into the target, we'll land it on a transfer cache effectively. And from there, then, we can push it through any of these various plugins that we have in the system. And again, that's WAN acceleration and encryption if you're doing a WAN transfer, or you have a high latency issue internally as well. We could do asset rewraps, asset transcodes, and we'll also grab some of the technical metadata from the assets as we're pushing them through the environment as well, things like, bit rates and frame size, et cetera, et cetera. So you can get a nice seed of metadata from a technical perspective as we're pushing the data through. And then the target on that obviously is Cloudian in terms of a private cloud solution. And again, you'll notice that we're writing content plus metadata into the Cloudian store, so you get the benefit of persistence of legacy archive metadata, the enhancement of our technical metadata, and obviously the level of control inside of their system, which David will talk about here in a bit. If there is a desire to reuse and repurpose some of your existing on-premise infrastructure, like your tape robots, maybe you want to ease into, object, you want to ease into cloud, maybe your existing legacy archive system doesn't support those natively or has excessive charges for licensing, we can introduce our software-defined archive, which I'll talk about in a couple of slides here, but effectively it's a storage orchestration platform, which can continue to leverage some of your existing on-premise workflows as we're transitioning you into these next generation archive environments. And then again, to close out the loop, we take and preserve all of legacy archive metadata through the workflow. And again, we've already done things like pre-building Lambda functions in AWS as part of a solution that we have with them. We co-developed called Media to Cloud. So it's media, the number 2, and then cloud. So I urge you to check that out if you're looking at some AWS workflows. And of course, we can work in parallel and in tandem with those workflows with the Cloudian infrastructure as well as we transition you into your new archive. So if we look at the path to your next generation archive, it's intentionally a sort of windy, twisty type path, just because it's a very, very complex thing. Most of the clients that we're dealing with today have had these archives for close to a decade now. That's very ingrained in their workflows and their infrastructure. So we certainly take the transition path quite seriously. But I think we're uniquely positioned as probably the only solutions provider in the world that can have you can have engaged in this process right from the inception conversation through to the sunsetting of your legacy archive platform. So again, just to highlight, we really work with you to understand what your corporate objectives are, where you're heading, what your thoughts are. Maybe you have a cloud first strategy, to coin the term. Then we move on to detailed planning. So again, by grabbing information from your strategic plan, looking at your archive systems, the workflows that you have today, we can start laying out a path that's pragmatically viewed to the transition to your next generation archive. Again, we believe in data-driven decisions. So this idea of data empowerment, our capabilities to pull detailed statistics and metrics from your environments, regardless of the legacy archive provider, and provide you with a really deep and insightful view of, all the KPIs that are relevant to, planning and modeling what your future could be. And in some cases, we're actually, obviously engaged either by, if we're engaged by the end client, what we'll do is we'll suggest that they redact that information, and that could be a seed of a conversation with Cloudian as well. Here's what we do, here's what we need, here's the storage, the growth trends, the ingress and egress, here are the bandwidths that we need. And that could be a nice seed to the conversation with them as well, where you're not over provisioning, you're not buying more than you need, and really you're understanding exactly what the cost impact would be to move to this new world. And then that's part of our TCO analysis, of course, as well, where we can run different scenarios. And those scenarios could be, you have a tape infrastructure, so let's continue to try to use that for a period of time, maybe until we face our next generational migration. Based on the analysis, we've identified that maybe 10% of the archive is actively used. So let's put in a footprint of Cloudian that represents 10% of your total asset store. And then let's take one copy of everything and let's put it into, Glacier DIVArchive or, some other similar cloud service where you have it protected, you have diversification, you have a business continuance plan, you have your disaster recovery covered, and effectively we're transacting on-prem to sustain your existing workflows and you're avoiding all of the potential egress pitfalls from the various cloud providers. And we can build up those models, and effectively you sort of get a slider bar, which can help you to understand where the fine point of the right balance is. The next step, obviously, is once you've laid out the plan, we've helped you to visualize what your TCOs are, is obviously the actual heavy lift itself. In some cases, depending on the content and utilization, this might take, months, or it could effectively take years if there's a lot of data in the system and there's limited resources. So we just want to make sure that we're embarking on this journey early enough in the process that, we're not under the gun to try to get off of a system in, 6 months that we know is going to take a year to do. And if we get in there early enough, we can put that out as part of your fiscal planning as well. Legacy archive support, this is something that we've done in some cases where during this migration period, we can help with the ability to, keep servers running and recover from failures and do things like that. So, obviously we will continue to encourage you to sustain your existing support contracts until the system is no longer required. But in some cases, we can actually help. And I guess the big value of this is that, this is not our primary business. We're not interested in doing this other than to help our clients that are facing or going through a migration process. So if we could, go month to month, and as soon as the migration is done, you cease paying support fees on your legacy archive system. So it can become somewhat beneficial from a cost perspective. And in some cases, actually, because we do that at a reduced rate, it could potentially offset the actual migration charges as well in some cases. And then, the last side of this process is once we've migrated everything, we've confirmed and authenticated that all your assets have been migrated. We've captured any deltas that occurred during the, short or long-term migration phase. We can help you sunset your system, turn it down, and, get you into your next generation archive solution. Okay, and then just quickly, just a couple of slides on our software-defined archive. So again, this is something that you should think about as a storage orchestration platform. It can run on commodity servers on-premise. It can run, it could span across into the cloud as well. Effectively, it's for managing tier 2 through tier 5 or 6, depending on how you count, of your storage. So this is not to sit above your tier 0 or tier 1. In fact, we would connect into those tier 0, tier 1 storage tiers, and then we would integrate backwards into tier 2 and beyond. We alleviate the burden of migration. And what I mean by this is, again, in that model where you want to maybe continue to leverage your existing tape infrastructure, but you want to put in a footprint of Cloudian to kick off, this move into the new world, but perhaps with, de-risking yourselves a little bit in terms of maybe not spending the entire capital budget on Cloudian out of the gate. Maybe you're embracing cloud providers and you don't want to do everything, or you want to maintain a cloud safety net. So there's a lot of different scenarios where this could be of significant value. But the idea is once you have the content under management of our software-defined archive, when you do expand out your Cloudian footprint, you just drag and drop storage buckets within our system, and we'll start to replicate more and more objects from tape into your object store. And the idea there is maybe when the forklift comes after, a few years and you're facing another data tape migration, maybe rather than doing that, you actually shut down the system. And really, that's what our storage orchestration platform can help you do. Again, fundamentally, we link metadata and content in the system. So your storage policies are no longer, things based on file size and file dates and file times. It's really about cognitive management of your data. You could be creating storage policies based on facial recognition data, based on, number of utilizations of the particular segments of the object. Could be based on script information or captioning keywords. So it's really decisions based on metadata or cognitive management of your high resolution or low resolution content. A couple of points that we've really seen that have seemed to be resonant in the market is, a lot of media and entertainment companies are, all over the cloud when it comes to their OTT services. Some have implemented large-scale media supply chain implementations in the cloud as well. But when it comes to their archives, they want to sort of take a slower, more pragmatic path in there. So, again, maybe it's taking only 10% of the content into the cloud to transact on it. Maybe it's your most utilized stuff. Maybe you're distributing that more often, and maybe you're going to put 100% image of your content into a Cloudian footprint on premise. But the idea there is to be able to allow you to, again, based on metadata queries, basically turn up and down your cloud dial while you still maintain control of your assets on premise, and giving you the opportunity to, again, take a very pragmatic cloud approach, maintain an on-premise safety net for your assets, and then enable multi-cloud workflows. And again, the multi-cloud workflows can be enabled through our SDA, but also Cloudian, as David will explain, have a lot of this native support within their system as well. So again, the combination of Ergo, of Cloud First, and of Cloudian is really about architecting the best solution for your environments. We don't limit to media workflows, so this is just as applicable if you have Word documents and images and graphics and things like that. It really doesn't matter what data you have. We have all the, versioning and audit trail capabilities in the system as well. One of the most important things about this software, and it's really breaking the model versus these legacy archive platforms, is we don't license by capacity. So whether you're running 1 petabyte on premise or 100 petabytes on premise, it's the same price for the software. Okay. And then just to round it out, I'll just put up a picture here since it tends to tell the story better than a bunch of words. But with the software-defined archive, you have all these different things, these things that create assets and consume assets and modify assets and, transport or transform assets. And really, we can't define nor predict what those are today. Well, we know what they are today, but we can't predict or know what they're going to be tomorrow. And this could be, a new user-generated content channel that somebody in your organization decides that they're going to launch, or, somebody in your graphics department wants to launch a different program. So really, what we're trying to do is support all these workflows by not having proprietary capabilities in our system. And basically, when we look at the storage technologies down below, this could be any mix of legacy storage. So again, we do include NAS control in our systems because you might have some old Isilons that you want to repurpose or some old NetApp. And the idea is really moving towards object store for private cloud and then public cloud, obviously, for the ecosystem benefits. And the SDA, software-defined archive, really sits in the middle. Again, it runs on commodity servers. It's scalable. There's no real pragmatic limitation to how many objects or the size of the system. But one of the key things that we do is we expose up standard interfaces like S3, CIFS, and NFS. And one of the interesting things there is those are also metadata-based as well. And what I mean by that is effectively these aren't just metadata queries into the SDA. So you can have an S3 endpoint that, is every time Tom Cruise's face or name appears in content, I want people that are mounted on or hitting that endpoint to see those assets. Maybe I want another S3 endpoint that's for approved images, and we could be getting a metadata tag back from your MAM system that tells our system that it's an approved image or not an image. And that goes for the S3, the NFS, and the CIFS endpoints as well. And then, as I mentioned before, the idea here is that, we have these undefined workflows and tools and things that create and consume and distribute and transform content. We can't tell you what to do and when to do it and how to do it. But down below, when we're talking about the storage policies, SLAs, those are rules driven. But where we connect the dots on that is, again, it's about cognitive management. So those are now based on metadata policies like, season and episodic and what year and what program and what sporting venue and what, player, those types of things. And all of that can define now the SLAs and the workflows and lifecycle policies inside the software-defined archive. So with that, thank you very much. If you have any questions, you can visit our website at cloudfirst.io. And with that, I'll hand it over to David Phillips from Cloudian to take you through their solutions.
Thank you, Brian. So today I wanted just to follow on from Brian's presentation with kind of some context for, okay, I've got a legacy archive, potentially going to work with Brian in his professional services and software platform to to move to a next generation solution, I still need a place to put my archive, and we find a lot of enterprises in the media space are at a crossroads where they are facing either a LTO tape format migration, if they're on 4, 5, or 6, LTO 4, 5, or 6, they are faced with completely rewriting their archive to the latest format, 7 or 8. So they find, okay, if I'm going to go through this process of completely migrating my archive, do I want to investigate some of the modern options available? And object storage is quickly emerging as a key enabler for next generation archives. And that's where Cloudian kind of fits into this picture, is a scalable distributed object storage platform in your data center that provides all of the data protection and high availability that object storage technology provides. So a little bit about again, the issue is media and enterprises are faced with ever-increasing size of their archive, and also they also increasingly have demands on the speed of turning around retrieving assets as well as transforming assets into new formats. There was an Ernst & Young study recently that the results of which were that 77% of media and entertainment companies reported that they were challenged to locate and retrieve data within requested time frames. And it speaks to some of the kind of limitations of legacy archive systems. If you're talking about an LTO tape library where you have tape sets that you're offloading an instance, a tape set, and sending it off-site for a separate, geo-distributed, geo-separate offline instance. If you need to access assets that is on an offline tape set, then the time to identify, locate, and then reload that tape set, the time to restore, we have customers that report that oftentimes it can take up to 72 hours to restore media assets from the time they're requested from production. So how does object storage as a technology help? It provides a central storage repository where all of the media assets are indexed in a single UR addressable namespace. The benefit is that it's on spinning disk, it's online on your network, and through the architecture, it's essentially globally accessible. So the goal is not only to speed time to access over traditional LTO tape storage media, but also to try to ease the engineering overhead for managing physical media, managing both the robotics of the tape libraries as well as the tape sets themselves. And like I say, there's a lot of enterprises that if they've done a number of tape format migrations, the difficulty and expense that any tape migration represents, you have to allocate some swing space in order to restore your archive and then write it to the new tape format, can be a very tedious and manual process that can be prone to human error. So Cloudian provides object storage that's based natively on the S3 API. When the product was developed in 2011, the developers, founders of the company, chose the AWS S3 API as the native object storage API for the platform. And the reason they did this is because they saw it as It was a bit of a gamble at the time, but it's proved to be prescient in that the AWS S3 API has become something like an industry de facto standard for object storage API. The Cloudian platform itself is based on a kind of best-of-breed collection of open source technologies, chiefly the Cassandra database that was open sourced out of Facebook in 2011. Cassandra provides a massively scalable distributed database architecture, and for our storage platform, it holds all of the metadata about both the storage platform configuration, the nodes, the health and configuration of each node, but also the S3 data about the S3 objects on the platform. The key enabler for the S3 API is that it empowers enterprises to take advantage of both hybrid workflows and multi-cloud workflows. It is, like I say, become the lingua franca, of object storage, and therefore every native S3 object that you store on Cloudian essentially becomes a self-contained portable asset. If you migrate it to a public cloud repository like an AWS S3 bucket, then all of that enriched metadata goes along for the ride and is accessible via the S3 API standard. Architecturally, we use the same architectural concepts that AWS used in developing their S3 storage platform. It is a peer-to-peer system where it's a shared nothing system where everything is distributed across every node in a cluster, data, metadata, and configuration across the Cassandra database cluster. So this sits behind a customer's network load balancer for high availability and high performance throughput. So everywhere on their network, their registered domain for their S3 storage service is accessible via a single domain space. And that includes if a customer has requirements for replicating their data to a second data center, then we have very flexible storage policies on a bucket-by-bucket basis where, based on customer requirements, you can have all of the assets in a bucket are replicated to a second site, or if there's certain assets that are more ephemeral and temporary, they can have a different storage policy where they're not replicated. We're one of the most flexible and customizable solutions as far as storage policy on the market. And the concept extends to public cloud targets. So we have also very robust tiering policies. We're one of the few platforms that can tier to all three major public cloud vendors, AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud Platform, all while still being accessible from behind a global server load balancer behind your private domain. So the Cloudian product portfolio is primarily two products: HyperStore, which is our object storage platform, which I've been describing, the scale-out architecture with integrated data protection around erasure coding and replication policies. And then we have essentially a cache service that provides legacy network file protocols like NFS and SMB. The architecture for this product, the Hyperfile NAS controller, is that every file that's written to the Hyperfile caching server, by default, after 20 seconds, it's flushed down to the HyperStore object storage bucket for persistent storage. It is essentially a stateless device. Once all of the files have been flushed down to object storage, the hyperfile controller can essentially go away, and you still have access to all of your native S3 objects on the HyperStore platform via the S3 API. It is actually quite a unique solution in that sense. There's a lot of NAS gateway appliances and services that proprietize the data. Everything that's written through a network file protocol is actually kind of fragmented into proprietary objects on the object storage platform for persistent storage. So we call this essentially a bimodal design where things could be written through network, but they're readable via S3, by the native S3 API on the object storage platform. So all of this together provides what we consider a next generation foundation for enterprises' media assets. We work together with a wide variety of different application vendors in the media and entertainment space. And because we're a native S3 API, we can leverage that S3 compatibility to integrate into quite complicated media enterprise ecosystems. We also provide the scalability that gives the peace of mind that once I start placing my objects, my media assets on the Cloudian platform, I can easily scale it as needed over time in a very granular way. You can add a single node in order to gain capacity and at the same time also performance throughput. So we don't confine you to having to expand your storage cluster in predefined blocks, predefined numbers of nodes. The power of the platform comes with the metadata capabilities. We've actually utilized, again, the open source community provides a plugin that streams Cassandra database data to Elastic Search database index, which means you essentially get a complete index of everything that's stored within your object storage platform that can be further enhanced with a Kibana dashboard, or it could be utilized by another media asset management platform or hierarchical storage management platform. But all of the rich metadata that can wrap around every single media asset object can also be further enhanced by either on-premises AI and machine learning services, libraries, and because of the native S3 API, we can also even take advantage of public cloud AI and ML metadata enrichment. So again, I keep hammering about the S3 API, but it's really central to our value proposition, because in media and entertainment, it's all about the application stack. We are a scale-out storage platform, but it's at the end of the day, enterprises, it has to be integrated with the rest of their particular ecosystems. So we have a wide variety of application vendors that we've certified and validated that our S3 API is compatible with all of their verb calls and API calls. And it differentiates because every node in our cluster is servicing S3 API calls. There's a lot of object storage platforms in the market that have a proprietary object storage API, and in order to provide S3 access, they have to bolt on a translator module that ends up becoming a performance and compatibility bottleneck. So with that, I will turn it back over to the presenter, to Johnson, for we can see if there's any questions from the audience.
Great. Thank you very much, David. Appreciate it. We do have quite a few, so we'll try to, respectful of time. We might limit and actually answer them through email for the ones we're not able to get to today. But let's get started. The first one I have is, what can we do to leverage public cloud ecosystem workflow components such as ML, machine learning, AI, for metadata enrichment during our legacy archive migration to our new object storage and archive solution?
Yeah, good question. Maybe I'll take that. This is Brian.
Yeah.
I think we actually have a couple options, and maybe I'll actually start with our thoughts on it, and then maybe David can pipe up because I know that they're doing quite a bit there as well. So what we're working with some of our clients on are workflows like the media to cloud that I discussed before. So effectively, that's where we're pushing high resolution assets into S3 buckets, and we've sort of pre-built a templated version. So actually, in fact, you can kick this off in a couple minutes anyways, where an asset lands in your S3 bucket, you bring your own credentials, so we don't have any involvement in that. You can negotiate your best rates yourself. The JSON sidecar that we send into this S3 bucket effectively kicks off a bunch of Lambda functions, which are serverless functions to do things like transcoding, to generate proxies, kicks off Amazon recognition, which is sentiment analysis, facial detection, et cetera, et cetera. It kicks off transcribe, which is speech to text as well. And effectively, all of that metadata then is pushed into a unified search and retrieval tool, basically built on Elasticsearch. The one particular template that we've built is also implements Levels Beyond, which is a MAM provider. And I think that AWS is working on compatibility with several other MAM vendors as well. But one of the ancillary workflows is if you're not looking to immediately move your high resolution assets into the cloud, is through our Rapid Migrate, because we can generate frame accurate proxies of your content as we're migrating the high resolution into Cloudian, is we could be throwing those over the fence, and that could be pushed up into Gray Meta, for example, or directly into AWS if you have your own implementations of recognition and transcribe and comprehend. And effectively, we could basically, for zero ingress cost and very little storage cost, because we're just setting up proxies and very little bandwidth, perhaps using public internet, you could be enriching your metadata, and you can be bringing that metadata back on premise and implementing it inside of your existing MAM system, or perhaps you can deploy a MAM in the cloud. So there's a lot of good workflows that we can automate through the migration process.
Great,
yeah.
Thank you very much for that. Oh,
yeah.
Sorry, go ahead, David.
No, I exactly. I think the flexibility is really what's driving a lot of customers to really reevaluate their legacy media archives. And from the Cloudian side, the power that we bring to the table is that the S3 metadata that Brian alluded to is like that you can employ all of these cloud services, for transcription, image recognition, et cetera. The S3 metadata is quite a large, metadata key space, where you can essentially have a self-describing media asset. So in the past, you would have a designated media asset management database that would hold all of your metadata about your content and media assets, and every part of the pipeline would have to query that database to say, like, what is this asset? What is this? Has it been QC'd? Is it ready for air? Much less like, is who is in this image or video file? All of the kind of content-specific things. So having a self-describe and portable metadata that goes along with the assets, no matter where it is, moves to or is physically transported, is part of the power of this next generation platform.
Okay, cool. Thank you. To kind of follow up on that one, is it possible to use public cloud media processing services like transcription and transcoding with on-premises Cloudian S3 buckets?
Yeah, absolutely. Again, either orchestrated through the cloud first, software-defined archive, all of the processes and that they enable on that platform. And because we're native S3 API, any cloud service that can redirect to a private URL, s3.yourdomain.com, is just simple example, essentially becomes just as if it were an AWS bucket. So we've done testing and verification with transcoding platforms like Hybrid that essentially are completely hosted solutions within AWS. But if you have the network connectivity that allows connection to the public internet, they can essentially transcode. You can transcode all of the needy assets in a Cloudian bucket, burst it through their cloud transcoding hosted service. Same goes for transcription and all of the other services as well. So.
Got it. Okay. And do I have to manually migrate my assets when I refresh my Cloudian hardware?
So that's also one of the, kind of going back to a manual, like LTO tape format migration. One of the benefits of Cloudian is that if you, after 5 years' time and it's time to refresh the hardware, the commodity hardware that, runs our software, we can provide essentially no downtime rolling hardware refresh where a new node, typically with higher capacity hard disk drives, is installed, and then in the background, the HyperStore service automatically rebalances all of the data from the legacy nodes to the new hardware in a rolling fashion, that while still providing online availability of the storage service. So it's a much different equation than the manual heavy lift of migrating from LTO5 to LTO7, et cetera. So.
Got it. Okay. Cool. The next one I have is, we don't want to move off our legacy archive platform today, but it does not support object storage. What can we do to get the best of both worlds without taking the risk of moving to another archive software solution now?
Yeah, that's actually
for Brian.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, and we are running into this scenario often where, the idea behind these platforms, even if you don't believe that they're specifically or necessarily aligned with the future vision and strategy for your next generation archive, the truth of the matter is that, they're kind of the known, I don't want to call them the known evils because a lot of them are actually good products, but they're the known systems, right? You know the nuances of it, you know how to restart things when things stop working, you know how to, tweak the connectors or do whatever you need to do to keep it running. So, a lot of times we're not aggressively pushing the clients to move away. So we do have solutions, which is sort of a combination of our Rapid Migrate plus some other tools, where we can either, do a wholesale replication. So perhaps you're facing an LTO, LTO-X to LTO-Y migration inside of your legacy archive platform. What we'll do is we'll align with that migration, and while you're doing that migration, which forces you to essentially read back from your old data tape and write to the new data tape, there's a transition in the middle where that data exists on spinning disk somewhere in the system. We can actually leverage that and actually take those assets and make copies of it onto your Cloudian infrastructure. Again, either portions of your content or the full catalog. And perhaps with your migration, let's say you're moving to LTO-8, what we'll suggest is, if you're doing that and you're replicating everything into a Cloudian infrastructure, why don't we just make one copy onto LTO-8? So right away, your infrastructure costs and your support costs get cut in half, maybe for, $50,000 for a few LTO-8 tape drives and some data tapes. You can actually have one instance of all of your data on, very cost-effective data tape, but you can gain all the benefits of the Cloudian infrastructure for your day-to-day operations. And again, we have tools that can help abstract those two solutions as well, so that you don't have to rewrite your MAM systems, you don't have to redo your workflows. we can offer sort of an abstraction that makes that a seamless operation. But it's a great opportunity that while we're reading back from your data tapes anyways, why don't we take that opportunity to, seed your Cloudian private cloud infrastructure?
Great, thanks, Brian. I think we just have time for one more question, and it's, what factors affect the migration timeframe from my legacy archive system?
Yeah, that's another good one. Sorry, David.
Yeah.
Yeah. So what we've done is over the course of the dozens of migrations that we've helped clients with over the past year or so, we've gathered a lot of data around the parameters that affect migration time. So I mean, there's the obvious ones, which is the total amount of data that you need to move. But then there's subtler factors like positioning times on data tapes, the average object sizes, how many objects are stored on data tapes, are there objects that have been spanned across data tapes. So effectively, as part of our our analysis phase of your existing environments, we can come up with let's say a fairly accurate timeline based again on resource utilization, how many data movers, how many drives do you have available at any particular time of the day and day of the week? What type of tape technology is it? Obviously LTO3 is a lot slower than LTO6 or 7 or 8. So that gets factored into the equation, the number of objects on data tapes, the number of drives you have in the system, the number of data movers, obviously your pipes. So how much bandwidth do we have into your Cloudian infrastructure or into your public cloud infrastructure? So all of those kind of get rolled into an analysis that we do part of our audit phase, where we can come back to you with some recommendations on that front as well. And in some cases, we'll come back with a number that says, okay, it's going to take you a year, and here are the gating factors on it. And maybe you'd want to go out and look around on eBay and buy a bunch of old LTO X tape drives to put back into your library to give us additional resources to speed that to accelerate that migration time. So we can work with you quite closely on that as well.
Great, thanks, Brian. Well, in the interest of time, I think that's all we can answer at the moment. We'll make sure we get to everyone's questions through email. Again, thank you very much for everyone for joining. Visit us at NAB at the booth numbers that you have in front of your screen, and if you have any specific questions, feel free to reach out to either Brian or us at Cloudian at resources@cloudian.com. That being said, we look forward to having you join us for the next webinar. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.